Hi, my name is Elizabeth McPherson, and this is my introduction for school law. So, just a little bit about me. So, I am a military spouse. My husband has been active duty for 13 years. Fort Riley is our fourth duty station. Um, so, I have lived in Minnesota, Florida, and Kansas, which has given me kind of a great opportunity to see different educations and kind of expand my career in that sense, which is awesome. We have a 5-year-old daughter. Her name is Violet, and she is not thrilled to have mom as her teacher for the unforeseeable future. So she's lovely and she's fun. So I've been teaching for 10 years. I have a math degree and a special education degree. Like I said, we're military, so I've gotten to teach in 3 different states, 4 different schools so far. This is my fourth school. So lots of variety of opportunity. And I'm pursuing this degree kind of with the future hope of being an administrator in the special education field. Some things I do for fun are running. I'm trying to run 20 races in 2020, which the coronavirus is not helping because all the races are getting canceled. I recently took up boxing, which has been an excellent stress reliever if you need one as a teacher. And I'm a former basketball player. So some things I kind of love are math. I love going to different state fairs, especially to eat the donuts, as they are my favorite food. And I'm an avid crafter, so maybe some of this time at home I can work on some crafting. So, my background again, as in math and special education, I originally pursued my bachelor's in mathematics. I finished that up and kind of thought the math world maybe was not quite exactly where I wanted to go. I loved math, but some of the traditional mathematic jobs weren't really fitting my personality. So I went back and got my secondary education license to teach math. As soon as I did that, I realized how much I kind of loved and had a heart for the kiddos that struggled. So then I completed my master's in special education to get my special ed license. My first job was as a math specialist at Christian Heritage Academy in Minnesota. It was a very small private school. I started out teaching their math program, and then as I got into my master's program, I started doing an intervention program for them. So instead of having to go to the public school for services, the kids were able to stay at our school to get their service minutes with me. So that was kind of my first dose of special education there. Once I finished my special education degree, I left and went to Academy of Whole Learning. It is the only school in the state of Minnesota and one of very few nationwide that is directly geared for students on the autism spectrum or with related disabilities. So I taught high schoolers in a self-contained classroom all day, every subject. Students who were on the spectrum. I was their STEM specialist and math specialist. We did some Project Lead the Way, which is an engineering robotics program, some really cool stuff. And I really kind of got to really immerse myself in the special education world there. And it was like invaluable to my kind of knowledge in that respect. When we PCS'd, we ended up in Florida. From there, I kind of left the special education world. Florida wouldn't accept my special ed license from Minnesota at that time. So I went back to the math world and I taught 3 years in high school math. I loved it. AP Stats, Algebra 2, remediated Algebra 1, kind of a big spectrum, but it was a nice little break, a nice kind of regroup from special education and back to my math roots. Now that we are here at Fort Riley, Kansas, I work at Junction City Middle School in Geary County, and I am a behavior specialist. So diving kind of headfirst back into the special education world, I have a self-contained classroom of 6th through 8th graders who all have social emotional behavior needs. So as we look at levels of government control, one thing I kind of thought was interesting as I was researching this is having been in 3 different states in education, I could really see as I was reading these articles some of the difference between the local, state, and federal policies just because I've transitioned locally and state, but kind of those federal guidelines that have followed everywhere I've taught. So it was kind of interesting to read some of these articles. So the local government governed by our school district. So this is a kind of a policy across the board that these local school agencies have school boards. They appoint superintendents to kind of lead, and one article mentioned CEO, the schools, they take control over the curriculum, the staffing, the kind of day-to-day operations of school. A lot of things have to be approved by the school board. Um, they kind of fund any budgets that state and federal don't fund, which through the article kind of ends up looking like 30 to 40%, just depending on how you slice it. The state, when we transition to the state, has the authority to create the Department of Education for their state. So they establish things like our standards, our assessments, kind of our overarching principles that need to kind of blanket all of the states in Kansas. One way that this was explained to me, which was really awesome when I transitioned to Minnesota to Florida, is these state programs really help us ensure that school to school kids are supported in the same way. So you might go to high school A and things might look and run a little bit different, but if you transition to high school B, you should be able to kind of pick up academically, testing, credit wise, pretty much the same. So that was kind of a good way to look at it. They do fund approximately half of the budget that the school needs, coming from primarily taxes. It did say some lottery support, which kind of comes out in the wash by the time you put in taxes and things like that. And then they're in charge of just delegating the responsibilities to school bodies. So making sure, again, that they're kind of coming up with these procedures and policies with curriculum and standards and kind of general practices, and then issuing those out to the schools to kind of implement again. So then we get to the federal. One article said 8%, another I read said 10. So, in that 8 to 10% margin, they are getting their funds from the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, Head Start programs, and the Department of Agriculture's lunch program. So the money that they do funnel in kind of comes from a variety of different angles. Um, the article stated that the federal government ensures that no student is denied the right to equal education opportunities based solely on race, ethnicity, gender, disability, or other protected status. So again, just kind of that blanket understanding that these federal mandates are really ensuring that all of our children are supported. So they work on funding our high need students, our students with disabilities, our students with varied socioeconomic statuses. So they kind of monitor all that, and then they support educational research and development. So they're really looking at the federal level for best practices, best strategies, best laws, best regulations that all students everywhere need. And then, of course, obviously our testing requirements that come down from federal government. So who's in charge of these? Here in Geary County, we have a school board. It's 9 members. We have a superintendent, a clerk, and a treasurer that support those 9 members. The superintendent is appointed by the school board. So the school board consists of volunteer members. The superintendent is a paid position. And when I was looking at the standards, I felt like the local government fit into the standard 6.1 piece the best. Some key words that I pulled out from this standard were that they implement management, they have school level governance, and they support mission and vision of the school. So I think when we think about some of those key words like school level, mission, and vision, we're really seeing that this 6.1 standard is all about kind of like the hands-on nitty gritty, that real applicable stuff. And I think that when we think about who's doing that, it really is the local level. It's the school board making those hard decisions for schools. It's superintendents trying to oversee lots of schools in one district and things like that. So then moving to the state level, we have our governor, Laura Kelly, and our commissioner of education, Dr. Randy Watson. The commissioner of education really just kind of oversees all the districts, communicates from the federal level to the state level, is kind of a liaison for all the representatives that make up the State Department of Education in Kansas. And as we can see in the recent climate of our state, this state level holds a lot of authority. I think that, I don't know if I'm the only Kansas teacher that was like a little taken aback at how quickly they closed school for the remainder of the year. Kind of whatever side of the coin of that you fall on, I think this is a very timely assignment in understanding that there are some people who have some pretty strong influence on how we conduct education, and it trickles down, and like the effect is really significant. And sometimes we can't see that as clearly as we maybe do in a national crisis like this, but I think that the state really hits some of the pieces in standard 1 with implementing management, school level government. I think that they have a little piece again that trickle down, but I do think probably primarily they sit in that 6.2 place. And here's some pieces that I pulled from there: developing data informed and equitable source resource planning. So I think at the state level, I really do see their function as bigger picture. Local, we're really getting nitty gritty. We're making really fine tooth decisions. We're writing board policies that are 50 pages long. And at the state level, yes, we are getting very nitty gritty and writing long policies as well, but we're also kind of looking at this big picture of what is our state doing overall? How are our kids performing overall? What is data? What is testing showing us that the resources we have providing are or not, equitable? So I think that state falls a little bit more into standard too. Then we go all the way to federal. We obviously have our President Donald Trump, our Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, and the Department of Education. So I think, again, in this kind of climate of national crisis, we see some of the influence that they have. I really think it's been key, though, to notice how much control the states have had over closure and online versus, cancellation of school, things like that. It's really, there's been a lot of state control there. However, I think that our federal piece falls under that 6.3. Some of the keywords I pulled out from the standard of 6.3 were implement laws, rights, policies, and regulations. So I do, again, think we continue to just kind of zoom out on this picture of education. And federally, we're saying, how are we creating students that are educated? What policies are we putting in place to ensure that happens from state to state? And kind of what rules and regulations do we have to provide as a nation to give some accountability to education? So how does this support the educational success and well-being of all students? I think when we look at the separation of control in any aspect, but especially education, that there's some real value to multi-level accountability. When all of our accountability is piled into one place, so let's say, state governments got everything, got all the say, got all the regulations, they were not federally controlled, they kind of gave local schools every mandate, every whatever, we'd have probably some disappointment. We see some things we want changed. It'd be harder to maybe change them. We kind of get this one note control, so to speak. So I think that there's some real value to that multi-level accountability. It spreads out the resources for a wide circumference of support. When we start locally and then reach out to the state and then reach out to the federal, we really widen our circumference of not only influence, but of accountability, of resources, of support. And so I think that tiered level of accountability with that spread of resources is really beneficial to the teachers that schools employ and to the students that schools support. So I think this local support really connects to relevancy. I think school boards, superintendents, community supports can really make community-based decisions. We can look at what our population needs. We can look at the demographic of our students, and the local school board and local school government can make best decisions. So I live in a military community, and what's really fascinated me from working at public and private schools in Minnesota, as well as public schools in Florida, is how many decisions are based on military kind of constraints. So, for example, the other day there was a water outage on, Post, and so all the Post schools were out. Or we make professional development days on our calendar based on when military holidays are. So my husband gets a lot of days off that, typical work people don't get. They get 4-day holidays instead of, Martin Luther King, instead of Monday, they'll get Friday, Monday. And so schools close a lot more around here for those military holidays. Veterans Day is closed. When we think about funding and resources when we do after school programming, it's so heavily related on our military community. So that local government really has the choice to make those decisions, and that's really cool. It's a unique situation that other communities don't have. I grew up in a town that was very, very tiny and small, and our school board could make a lot more decisions on when school got out for events. They would close down school sometimes for hunting season because literally every kid went. I mean, that was just the culture and the climate of the community. And so it really supports students on a local level and teachers when we can make those decisions. I think state support allows consistency and accountability for schools to ensure continuity. So I think when our state is allowed to make mandates and kind of make some guidelines that every school needs to follow, we find that consistency. Again, we want student A at, you know, Jenkins High School to be able to go over to Johnson High School and be, caught up with credits, caught up with classes, kind of fit in. And so those state supports allow that continuity for families, teachers, students to have support as we maybe need to transition to schools or places or anything like that. And I think federal support really allows for progress and innovation on a large scale. I think sometimes state and communities have to be so focused on those day-to-day procedures, some of those nitty-gritty curriculum decisions, those professional development decisions, those testing decisions. And while federal government does that too, I think that there's a little bit of room for innovation at those higher levels for people to really think big, to have the money to think big, to have the positions of authority to think big. So I like how the federal support kind of pushes education a little bit. I don't always agree with the choices they make and the mandates they have, and sometimes I think that our progress and innovation is lacking, that we're slow, that we're behind where we could. But I think in general, looking at the scope of local to federal, local we really get relevant decisions. State we really get consistency and accountability. Coming from the top, spread to the local, and then that federal, we kind of get to maybe put our thinking caps on as to where education could be. So I think overall, again, I've really found it interesting as a teacher who's taught multiple places and in multiple settings to look at um, this government assignment. And I'm really actually excited to pursue the rest of this class from a lens of seeing kind of where I've seen different pieces take place in the education that I've encountered. So I look forward to the class and learning with all of you.